Good afternoon to you. I'm Danilo Evangelista, and welcome to today's tropical weather outlook for August 14th, 2026. Today we're going to take a look at what is happening in the tropics today in the Atlantic, but especially update you on the Pacific as Tropical Storm Lala is continuing to strengthen and will be closing in on the Hawaii Islands as a hurricane and potentially make a hurricane landfall on the state of Hawaii for the first time in quite a long time, and it's looking like a pretty serious situation that will be unfolding, not just with the intensity. In fact, I think the intensity should be the least of the concern for the Hawaiian Islands, but the main risk will be the rainfall. We're going to go over everything you need to know today, and of course, I'll also update you on everything in general that is happening on the tropics besides Lala, but obviously that'll be the focus of today's video. So with that being said, let's get started. First off, I do want to briefly update you on what is happening in the Atlantic here. Both of our invests right now, Invest 92L and Invest 94L, have decreased in chances today, especially notably Invest 92L, which is down to a 10% chance and probably will not develop at all whatsoever. So if you are in the Lesser Antilles and in the Southern Caribbean here, good news, you won't have to worry about tropical development anymore, but you will receive some rainfall this coming weekend, which I think all of you guys in the Caribbean will definitely welcome. And 94L2, although still a median chance of development right now, it is slightly decreased from yesterday, and there's still a chance that 94L could develop, and maybe we could see a tropical system in the MDR here after all over the next week, but environmental conditions are kind of not that conducive right now, especially when it comes to dry air. Sure, we do have the issue of wind shear, but I really think it's the dry air that is keeping a lid on these systems from being able to develop, and I'll show you why that is in just a little bit. But the Atlantic, we still have disturbances to watch though, so we'll be monitoring 92L and especially 94L, which still has a decent chance right now to see if something does happen after all. But the main, focus right now is definitely strongly on the Pacific as things continue to heat up here. We have Tropical Storm Hernan, although this storm is on its way out, but the main focus right now is Tropical Storm Lala. Maximum sustained winds at 60 miles per hour, minimum pressure at 997 millibars, located at 17.0 north and 150.3 west. This is the storm that is the main impact to land over the next few days right now, aiming potentially directly at Hawaii this weekend, and it might do so, making landfall as a hurricane. And if that does indeed happen, it probably will be the first hurricane landfall directly on the island, probably going back to Iniki. Iniki was roughly at this point 30 years ago, or more than 30 years ago, nearly 35 years ago, I think. So very rare occurrence unfolding right now for Hawaii, and with that, we will see some pretty serious impacts, even though that we are only expecting a weak hurricane out of this. When this does make landfall, probably going to see a minimal hurricane. I'll go over the intensity forecast in a little bit, but a serious situation very likely is unfolding for Hawaii, and you guys will not want to take Lala lightly at all. And then, beyond that, even more disturbances popping up here in the Eastern Pacific, and another one as well, kind of showing out closer to the Central Pacific. So if you are in the Pacific right now, there is lots to keep tabs on with the tropics here over the next few days for sure. Really quickly though, touching upon the Atlantic once again before we spend the rest of the video pretty much going over Lala. You can see here in the Eastern Atlantic our tropical waves looking, beefy, but they're not really organizing all that much. 92L today actually producing quite a decent bit of convection. So as I said before, for the Caribbean islands here, and maybe even stretching in through general parts of the Caribbean, if this wave is kind of able to still keep it together somewhat, you guys will see rainfall. And of course, that is a good thing, but the thing is, wind shear will be a factor inhibiting tropical development from this, so you guys won't have to worry about a tropical cyclone anymore. And it's kind of the 1-2 punch of dry air preventing these storms from being able to consolidate, and then eventually, once they get further west enough and they get close to the Caribbean, they deal with the wall of wind shear, which kind of stretches them out. And even if they start to develop convection like 92L has kind of done so today, they can't develop because of strong wind shear preventing it. And 94L is also out here in the eastern Atlantic. And to be fair, 94L is producing some more convection today, but just look at the dry air that is prevalent to the north of it. It is really going to struggle, and it's going to have a battle ahead of it. And 94L, again, could still develop. The chances are still there, and some of the models today still indicate a potential development from 94L, but it is really a wait-and-see game. But more tropical waves are coming off after it. You can see the tropical wave train across the Atlantic right now, still active, and that's one thing that we are not lacking this year. Sure, there are many other factors that are not really favorable for this hurricane season, but one thing is for sure, our tropical wave train has surely been quite active and quite beefy. And you can see the amount of waves we have right now. Obviously, the first two are 92L and 94L, and then we have another wave coming off the coast of Africa, and probably more waves following right behind that. So we'll continue to watch these tropical waves and see if eventually one of them will actually try to spin up. And I'll show you later on towards the end of the video what the models are saying in terms of if any of these waves might have potential over the next few weeks to spin up in the Atlantic. The main focus of today's video, though, Tropical Storm Lala, as I promised, as it is approaching Hawaii now, and today it is definitely doing better. We're starting to see more deep convective activity blow up, and this storm is continuing to concentrate, especially after being a large monsoonal low, which it was a few days ago, and we've really come a long way since. But this still does have a pretty broad wind field, as I'll show you in a second here. So either way, even if this, barely clips Hawaii to the south, or, barely clips actually meaning landfall, but even if this barely touches or, barely doesn't make direct landfall on the Big Island to the south, the wind field is very expansive to the north. So either way, impacts are coming to the Hawaiian Islands, and you can in general see all of this convective activity, which is very expansive to the north here. And in general, this storm is kind of a northerly weighted system with the band here kind of wrapping in to the center. I do also want to show you something that is quite incredible, and this kind of just goes to show what a unique storm this is Lala right now here doing fairly decently in the weight and in the face of extremely dry air to the west of it. And it's just incredible that the storm is holding up very well. And obviously that dry air is having somewhat of an effect a little bit for maybe preventing it from consolidating as quickly as it possibly could have. And maybe if it weren't for all this dry air out here, we would be talking about Lala intensifying into maybe a near major hurricane as it is approaching Hawaii. And some of the hurricane models were showing that a few days ago. I mean, none of them show it now. They all show it mainly becoming a minimal hurricane at most. But even then, a minimal hurricane will still likely be very bad for the Hawaiian Islands because of the impacts it'll bring, that mainly being the rainfall. And probably what's really helping Lala here fight off against all this dry air is the very, very expansive outflow it has. And you could really see it pushing here against the dry air, especially on the northern fringes here. This outflow is quite incredible, and it's definitely helping keep the moisture bubble and the precip field together, all of which are, talking about precip and moisture. That's probably going to be the main story when it comes to Hawaii and impacts here from Lala. But a hurricane is expected nonetheless. Taking a look at the National Hurricane Center forecast track, going to generally move on off to the west-northwest here. Hurricane is expected probably by tomorrow, and then it should make its closest approach to the Hawaiian Islands tomorrow afternoon local time. So that would be respective to my time frame, that would be tomorrow evening East Coast time, and there are hurricane warnings in effect for the islands. And now we have tropical storm watches and warnings for the rest of the islands ahead of it. And you can kind of see why here. The wind field, the tropical storm force wind field, which you could see in this orange brownish color, I guess beigeish, this represents the tropical storm wind field as I'm trying to explain, although I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit. And you can see it is quite expansive, and in the very least, that's going to engulf the Big Island for sure. Even if this kind of goes slightly more towards the south, I mean, the Big Island is not going to escape the impacts from this, but especially if this ends up making landfall on the Big Island, the entire island will definitely experience tropical storm force winds, maybe even hurricane force winds if this strengthens to a hurricane before then, which, to be fair, it is forecasted, and probably the other northern islands as well. And looking at the impacts, what does the National Hurricane Center expect with the key messages here? And this is kind of just a breakdown of the main points to think about when it comes to Lala, and I'll break it down further here in these next few slides with the rest of the impacts we'll be watching. But the National Hurricane Center breaking it down, Lala is forecast to strengthen and become a hurricane as it approaches the Big Island of Hawaii on Saturday. A hurricane warning remains in effect for the Big Island, and a tropical storm warning has been issued for Maui County. Tropical storm watches have been issued for Oahu and Kauai counties. Winds are expected to be the strongest in areas of higher terrain. That's also something that, thanks to the natural terrain and geography of Hawaii, will probably make impacts worse too. At higher elevations, you're going to see higher gustier winds and heavy rainfall. This is, again, probably the biggest threat from Lala. Heavy rainfall associated with Lala will begin to impact the island today, the Big Island today, spreading westward across the rest of the islands for the remainder of the weekend. And the rainfall could potentially be life-threatening. Bring life-threatening flooding. It will be life-threatening because it will bring life-threatening flooding. Mudslides especially, again, thanks to the mountainous terrain, and it mentions that as well. And then obviously, too, the third impact is going to be the large, dangerous waves, and that's probably going to cause some storm surge. And the storm surge will not be significant, but we will see some storm surge nonetheless, and that will cause heavy surf and localized coastal flooding, which obviously will only add, misery on top of all the other bad things we are expecting right now. So, how are things looking like here with Lala, according to the models? I'll start off here with the 12Z GFS, and you can see it generally moves on off to the west-northwest here, and it should probably approach the islands and make a landfall roughly tomorrow evening into Sunday morning, and then maybe it'll get slightly affected here by the terrain of the mountains, because you see we go from 991 millibars, so I guess the GFS there is forecasting this to strengthen into a weak hurricane, and then it probably goes over the mountainous terrain of the Big Island, and because of that, it'll weaken, and it definitely weakens there. It goes from 994 to 1005, and then it strengthens afterward, but keep in mind of all the greens that you see here on the GFS, regardless of this, probably running into the Big Island and maybe being shredded, it's still going to have its moisture field with it. And because of that, there's going to be a lot of rainfall expected for the islands, and especially with the GFS forecast where it pretty much clips and makes landfall here on the southern portion of the Big Island. You could see what that does with the rainfall totals, especially parts of the Big Island here expecting up to 2 feet of rainfall, especially on the eastern side. And then as the days go on, the heavy rainfall should also expand westward and northwestward to the other islands as well, with many areas potentially seeing upwards of several inches of rain. And it's not going to be as bad for these, northern islands here, but especially for the Big Island, 2 feet of rain is no joke. In fact, 2 feet of rain, especially given the mountainous terrain and the geography of the Big Island, because the Big Island probably has the most amount of mountains, that is going to be devastating. And I cannot emphasize this enough. I mean, we've seen these situations happen continuously, especially on the mainland, with tropical and non-tropical storms of heavy rainfall events that just catch people off guard. So we're looking at a big rainfall threat here for Hawaii, and I want to emphasize that as much as I can. Even though this is not going to be a very strong hurricane, again, we're probably looking at a minimal Category 1 here, but 2 feet of rainfall, regardless, is definitely life-threatening. It will lead to flooding, and it is something that you cannot mess around with. And let me show you what the hurricane models show for the intensity. Let's start off first with the H-Wharf here, and so let's see what it does. It makes it brings it to minimal hurricane intensity, but it does bring the tropical storm impacts to portions of the entire northern islands as well, and it makes a landfall here on the northern portion of the Big Island, interestingly enough, although I wonder if maybe the center jumps northward a little bit because of the mountainous terrain. If we especially see this track here, that might even bring some of the heaviest rainfall totals of, potentially seeing as much as a foot to even 2 feet of rain over some of the northern islands here. And as I've said before, the northern islands are actually the most populated ones, especially this island here. This one in the far northwestern corner, not this one, because I believe here is where Honolulu is located. So imagine getting 1 to 2 feet of rainfall over a very populated metro like Honolulu is. Absolutely not a good case scenario, and even in this scenario here, more than likely heavy rainfall will still happen for the Big Island. And then let's take a look at the HAPS model here and see what it shows. And it still more than likely brings this storm either just south or into the southern side of the Big Islands. And here, for sure, we're guaranteed to see lots of impacts to the Big Island. And then even with that, tropical storm force winds will probably be felt to the north as well. So I think we can almost say with very high certainty now that for sure we will either see at the very most best case scenario in terms of track is that this, barely misses the island to the south, but in reality, it's not going to help. But even then, more than likely, I'd say right now the most likely scenario is that we see at least this clipping the southern end of the Big Island, and with that, heavy rainfall is guaranteed. More than likely, in fact, this is the official forecast from the National Hurricane Center. Isolated areas of up to 25 inches expected for the Big Island of Hawaii, and this is more than likely what will be the case, and even for the other smaller islands as well, upwards of 6 feet, maybe even up, not 6 feet, that would be incredible. 6 inches, maybe even up to isolated areas of 8 inches as well. And even for Maui too, they might also potentially see up to a foot of rainfall. So the rainfall will be the biggest story with Lala, and probably the most devastating aspect of this storm. Again, 2 feet of rainfall is something that you cannot mess with, and I don't think these rainfall totals will change unless we see a ginormous shift of the storm. And this ends up tracking well to the south of the island, and maybe the impacts here are only confined to the far southern portion of the Big Island, but at this point, it is not looking very likely anymore. In fact, I think, from here on out, the only place I think the track will more than likely shift to is probably further to the north, and that would only expand more of especially a lot of these heavier rainfall totals to these more northern islands as well. So there's no way of escaping potentially a very impactful storm here for Hawaii, and I think that is just the reality of what's going to happen with Lala. And of course, have to mention this too, tropical storm force winds will definitely be felt for most of the islands as well. With the Big Island right now seeing the highest risk for tropical storm force winds, but it even extends to the northern islands here as much as 30 to 40%. But for right now, the Big Island, they're expecting in the very least 70% for likely tropical storm force winds. So Lala is coming. Make sure to be prepared. I mean, we've had a few days to prepare. now, probably since the beginning of the week, we've been talking about a potential impact to Hawaii. You guys probably have at most a day or so, not even a day. You probably only have till the end of today to be able to make last-minute preparations. And if you're trying to get out of the islands before Lala makes its impact, you probably only have till tonight to be able to catch a last-minute flight out. And then from there on out, you're just going to have to ride this storm out for the next few days. And hopefully things are not as bad as they might seem. But with potentially up to 2 feet of rainfall forecasted, that is definitely not a very good forecast for sure. But obviously, we will be keeping a very close eye out on Lala, and we will continue to have updates throughout the day as things continue to evolve here. So make sure to stay tuned to my social media and YouTube and Twitter and all of that, and we will watch and see how Lala progresses. But it is definitely not looking good for Hawaii, and definitely looking like a situation that you will want to take very seriously. All right, closing out, I want to talk about the future of what is going to happen here in the Atlantic. Taking a look at the European model today, and you can see over the next week or so, nothing much really happens, surprisingly. The energy here with the 2 main tropical waves we're watching right now, first off, you can see 92L. The energy will just continue to move on off to the west here, and again, struggle to consolidate because it kind of, went past its window it had to be able to develop. If it was, more closer towards the central and eastern MDR, but it ended up getting, walloped by the dry air, and now that it's entering the Caribbean, it's just going to get swallowed and hit by a blasting buzzsaw of wind shear. So the main thing to expect for the islands right now over the next few days is rainfall and gusty winds from the remnants of these tropical waves, which will be moving through. Although 94L still might have a chance here, but the Euro today also is not very optimistic on the chances for 94L as well. And then taking it out to the next week, they don't really show much spinning up here as we go towards the end of the month. And again, what is the main reason as to why that is the case? Just look at all the dry air here that is especially in the northern MDR, and that's what keeps on choking off a lot of these tropical waves here. There's the shear, yes, and the shear is definitely a product of El Nino, but when you have dry air like this as well, especially with very fragile waves like we have, even though they are beefy, dry air tends to win out in the end, and at least over the next several days here to maybe the next week, that is what the Euro is showing, and that's what the case will very likely be for a time in the Atlantic. But as I keep saying, I do expect that eventually one of these waves will break through, because the dry air situation here, a part of that still has to do with climatology. And yes, as we get into the month of August, dry air should start to lift to the north, but even though it is kind of prevalent now. But that's the thing. As we get further and further into the month of August, dry air should continue to lift to the north. The Saharan air plume should be not as strong and suppressive in the Atlantic, at least in the MDR here. And we are still going to continue to get these pieces of energy, which will come off the coast of Africa, thanks to the tropical wave train, which will continue to crank up here over the next few weeks, and it's just going to continue to happen the closer and closer as we get towards the peak of the season. So we will continue to watch here, and I just think that eventually one of these waves will break through. It's just a matter of when does it happen. But we will see what it happens. But to close out, taking a look at the ensembles, and I'm just showing this to prove my point. We have 94L and 92L. The models are not enthused, but look at the signals that are still popping up on the long-range ensembles for the likely next 1 to 2 weeks to come. There are definitely signals to watch for sure. And again, now I'm just continuing to hammer my point home. I think eventually something will happen here in the MDR as we get more of these tropical waves to come off. Again, it's just a matter of when does something happen, and of course, how it happens. But until we see a solid signal pop up, we can't really harp on that right now because there is nothing solid to track yet. But of course, we will continue to watch the Atlantic over the next few weeks as we get closer to the peak of the hurricane season. And trust me, I do think something will happen, and things will begin to spark to life at some point. It's not going to stay dead completely, even if we are in a super El Nino right now. Something eventually happens at some point. Again, it's just a matter of when. All right, but that's going to do it for today's video. Hope you guys enjoyed what you saw. If you did, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe. And make sure to stay tuned if you want more updates on my YouTube channel. You know, they're coming, especially with Lala. I'm probably going to post another update tonight, going over, any updates to intensity and, recon data we get as well, including new models. So make sure to stay tuned as we continue to track the progress here of Lala as it approaches Hawaii this weekend. All right. Thanks for watching. Enjoy the rest of your day. Stay safe. Peace, love, and kindness to you all. I'll definitely talk to you guys again soon.